Mary Magdalene was a follower of Jesus. Now, some have said she's the one that's referred to as the prostitute in the Scriptures. We don't know that. The Scriptures don't say that. Dan Brown goes so far as to say the church was in this grand conspiracy to try to taint her reputation. Well, no, the church was in no such conspiracy. Now, there were some who made that error, who associated and assumed that Mary Magdalene was the prostitute. We don't have any biblical evidence for that. One of those was Gregory the Great in the year 590. He thought that Mary Magdalene was probably the once referred to as the prostitute. One of the reasons for that theory is because she comes from Magdala, which is associated with a great deal of prostitution traffic. But biblically, there's no evidence at all that she in fact was a prostitute. She was a follower of Jesus Christ, and an important one.
Mary Magdalene was an honored disciple of Jesus who supported him in ministry and was the beneficiary of an exorcism that Jesus performed. There are 12 passages that mention Mary Magdalene in the New Testament, and there she is described as a supporter of Jesus, as one who saw the crucifixion, as one who saw him buried, and one to whom Jesus appeared. There is no indication whatsoever that she was a prostitute. She is simply an exemplary believer in Jesus Christ. The description of Mary Magdalene as an apostle comes from a church father, in which he is not using the term in the way we normally use it to refer to one of the 12 around Jesus, but using it in its most basic sense, someone who is sent to give a message to another. This is precisely what Mary Magdalene did after the resurrection. She received the vision of the risen Lord, saw him, held on to him, and then went and told others that Jesus had appeared to her. She was an apostle in the generic sense, not in the technical sense. Some people ask where the idea that Mary Magdalene was the prostitute came from. Well, it really comes from a series of confusions between passages. There's an unnamed woman who anoints Jesus in Luke 7, and Mary Magdalene appears in Luke 8 right after this passage. But what's important to note is that Mary Magdalene appears as a new character, not as the woman who just anointed Jesus. In addition to this, there are two anointings, one involving the woman specifically named as Mary, in the other Gospels that are noted during the last week of Jesus' life. Multiple accounts is what I mean. And so when you put the Mary of these accounts together with the Mary Magdalene of Luke 8 and then go back to Luke 7, someone deduced this must be Mary Magdalene, the prostitute, the sinful woman of Luke 7. In fact, Gregory the Great did it in 591. He's the first one to make this identification. And it carried on as a mistake for centuries afterwards. Even the Catholic Church recently has recognized that this is incorrect.
Mary Magdalene has really been beset by so many false charges. It was a pope in the 5th century who first described her as the woman caught in sin, but there's no evidence whatever that she practiced the world's oldest profession. She did have some psychological problems, which Jesus cured, after which she was one of his prime supporters, along with other women in Galilee. And maybe we better let it go at that. There are so many sensationalist writers today who are like so many doddering mothers trying to marry off an over-eligible son, and she's always the candidate for Mrs. Jesus. Not historical.
The evidence that Mary Magdalene went to the south of France is something that appeared out of nothing in the 12th century. If you look into the centuries prior to this, there is no evidence of this story anywhere. In fact, the only evidence we have of where Mary Magdalene went is from the Eastern Christians, who clearly say that she went with the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. John the Apostle, and resided together with them in Ephesus and died in that area. The idea that she went to the south of France is very much like the idea that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. It's not something we can trace to his life. We know his biographer invented it. In the same way with Mary Magdalene, we know that this is something that was invented by the people of southern France because they really loved this saint and they would have liked her to have visited that area.
The figure of Mary Magdalene is, of course, very important in the Da Vinci Code, and one of the saddest responses to this novel, in my opinion, is that the truth about Mary Magdalene is really quite fascinating and quite inspiring, and it's being lost in all of this imaginative goddess construction. What we know about Mary Magdalene, we know from scriptures, mostly from the Gospel of Luke, in which she is introduced as one of a group of women that followed Jesus and his disciples in support of them, and then from all four Gospels, which place her as the first witness to the empty tomb, a very important role in Christian tradition, which led, for example, Eastern Christians to refer to her as the apostle to the apostles, a very elevated role, as opposed to Dan Brown's assertion that all Christianity does is denigrate Mary Magdalene. That's all we know for sure about Mary Magdalene. Subsequent Christian traditions have placed her spreading the gospel to Provence in France or to other parts of the Middle East. We don't know any of that for sure, but we do know that throughout Christian history, she has been revered as a brave, courageous witness to the truth of the risen Christ.
From the perspective of the New Testament and the historical evidence that's given there, Mary Magdalene appears to be a very close follower of Jesus. She's one of his disciples. The word disciple means to be a follower. She was clearly a follower. She was somebody that Jesus had a great ministry to, a great ministry with. In that sense, she's a very important person, showing how Jesus impacted people, even people who supposedly, as in the case of Mary Magdalene, may have had, and I want to stress this, may have had some psychological or spiritual problems. Beyond that, we're really not given any evidence as to her significance or her importance. And therefore, while we can honor her for being a faithful, loyal, committed disciple of Jesus, the evidence does not allow us to go anywhere else with that.